They laughed when we told them about bullets, right up until the first one punched through their commander's skull. The war began the way all wars do, with arrogance. The Zvani came in their gleaming warships, their voices humming through the open comms, making grand speeches about the inevitability of their victory. They spoke of their perfect shields and impenetrable defence, forged through centuries of technological refinement. They had crushed countless civilizations before us, and to them, we were just another primitive species waiting to be brought to heel. They were wrong. It started with a skirmish on the outer colonies. They came in hard, ripping through orbital defences and melting through steel bunkers with energy lances that left nothing but smouldering ash. But when the ground forces marched in, expecting the usual surrender, they met something else entirely, a single shot. One of our Marines, a sergeant named Cole, had been pinned in the ruins of a supply depot. His rifle was out of charge, his comms were down. The only thing he had left was a sidearm, a simple 9mm, something he'd carried out of habit more than necessity. The Zvani commander, draped in ceremonial armour, stepped forward, barking something in their sharp staccato language. A demand for surrender, no doubt. Cole shot him in the face. The bullet punched through the shimmering blue barrier like it wasn't even there, snapping the alien's head back and sending him sprawling. The rest of the squad froze. Then, in one swift motion, they raised their weapons and fired. The bullets kept going. The aliens scrambled, confusion spreading through their ranks like wildfire. Their shields flickered uselessly, shimmering in protest, but offering no protection. Some tried to activate heavier defences, bracing behind cover, expecting the old rules of warfare to still apply. But there was no saving them. We tore through them with sidearms, standard issue, outdated and utterly devastating. It took less than a day for the news to spread across every battlefield. Reports came in of humans dropping the invincible warriors with archaic weapons. The Zvani fought back, but their tactics unravelled. Every step they took was built on the assumption that their shields would hold. They didn't know how to fight without them. Back on Earth, Command scrambled to analyse the phenomenon. Some scientists from a think tank spat out theories, something about kinetic versus energy dispersion, about how their shields were designed to counter plasma, lasers, even railguns, but had no way to stop low-velocity projectiles that didn't rely on energy fields. The aliens had evolved their technology beyond conventional means of destruction, never imagining that something as simple as a lead slug could undo them. It didn't matter why. All that mattered was that we had a way to win. We adapted fast. Every soldier, every civilian militia, every resistance cell across occupied colonies switched tactics overnight. Advanced weapons were tossed aside in favour of old ones, M4s, AKs, bolt-action rifles from museum displays. The old gun factories, long shuttered in favour of energy-based arsenals, roared back to life. The first true counterattack came on Mars. The Zvani had entrenched themselves in the capital, confident in their victory. They didn't expect us to come charging in with weapons centuries behind their own. We hit them hard, storming through the streets with weapons they had no counter for. The battle was brutal, but it was ours the moment the first wave of humans breached their command centre. Something changed. Their soldiers, once proud, once assured of their superiority, hesitated. We saw it in their eyes, those black, pupilless voids that once regarded us as nothing more than an inconvenience. They were afraid. For the first time in their history, they weren't the unstoppable force. For the first time, they were losing. By the time we secured the city, every Zvani had either been killed or had fled, abandoning their own to the mercy of a species they had mocked. We found their officers in the ruins of their bunkers, trying to make sense of it all. Some refused to believe it, raving about sabotage, about betrayal from within. One of them, a high-ranking strategist, sat shaking behind the wreckage of a shattered command console, muttering in his language over and over again. He never thought it could happen. None of them did. But it was only the beginning. The retreat from Mars wasn't just a military failure for the Zvani, it was a humiliation. Their fleets, once considered invincible, now carried soldiers who whispered of death at the hands of humans wielding ancient weapons. Their high command scrambled for explanations, their broadcasts full of excuses. This is an anomaly, they claimed, a temporary miscalculation. But there was no miscalculation. Across every battlefield, the truth was laid bare. The Zvani had built their entire war doctrine around their shields. Every tactic, every weapon, every engagement relied on their invulnerability. And now, with that illusion shattered, they had nothing to fall back on. They tried adapting. Their engineers rushed to design new armour, thicker plating, kinetic barriers, but none of it could outmatch the sheer adaptability of human warfare. We had weapons stockpiled from centuries past, tactics built on generations of conflict. Where they had grown complacent in their superiority, we had perfected the art of war in 1,000 different ways. We weren't just beating them, we were hunting them. The push to reclaim Europa was led by the 22nd Expeditionary Division, a mix of Earth forces and scattered resistance groups from the colonies. The Zvani had turned the ice moon into a fortress world, confident in its defences, believing their occupation was permanent. They were wrong. The battle started the moment the drop ships landed. Zvani forces were dug in, their artillery raining fire down on the advancing infantry. In the old days, that kind of resistance would have been impossible to break. Their plasma turrets could melt through reinforced steel, their drones able to cut down squads in an instant. But they still had the same weakness. Private Mason, a former construction worker turned rifleman, took position behind a collapsed outpost. He lined up a shot with his grandfather's M1 Garand, an antique that should have been obsolete centuries ago, and fired. The Zvani soldier, crouched behind a flickering blue shield, jerked back as the bullet punched straight through his armour. His body hit the frozen ground with a dull thud. Mason reloaded. Around him, human soldiers advanced without hesitation. Gunfire cracked through the cold air, tearing through the alien defences. The once imposing Zvani bunkers became death traps, their reinforced barriers useless against waves of lead. By nightfall, the resistance was over. The few remaining Zvani who hadn't fled were captured or executed. Europa belonged to humanity again. In the Zvani High Command, panic set in. They were losing planets faster than they could regroup. Entire battalions were refusing to deploy. Some of their fleet commanders went dark, abandoning the war entirely. This was supposed to be a conquest. Instead, it was turning into a rout. Desperation took hold. Zvani leadership authorized the use of extermination fleets, massive ships capable of leveling entire continents. If they couldn't hold the colonies, they would reduce them to ashes. Their first target was Titan. The warning came too late. By the time the evacuation orders were sent, the Zvani warships were already in position. Their main cannons charged, massive energy pulses building within the heart of their dreadnoughts. They didn't intend to occupy Titan. They intended to erase it. And then something happened that no one expected. One of their warships, an enormous city-sized behemoth, suddenly erupted into flames. A chain reaction of explosions ripped through its hull, tearing it apart from the inside. The remaining Zvani ships hesitated. Then the comms lit up. "Surprise!" came a voice somewhere deep within the chaos. Captain Erickson and his team had infiltrated the flagship using nothing more than stolen clearance codes, homemade explosives, and a few well-placed bullets. They had turned one of the most powerful weapons in the Zvani fleet into a drifting fireball. Panic spread through the alien ranks. Their perfect shields hadn't saved them. Their overwhelming firepower hadn't saved them. And now they had just lost the ability to glass a human colony. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time since it began, the Zvani finally understood what they were up against, and they were terrified. The Zvani had never known fear before, not real fear. They had studied war, dissected it, perfected their strategies. But never once had they experienced the sheer, gut-wrenching terror of watching their own kind be wiped out by an enemy they were supposed to dominate. But now they understood. Courts flooded their command centres. Entire battalions had deserted. Officers refused to deploy their troops. Some even defected, vanishing into deep space rather than face the relentless human advance. It wasn't just about the weapons anymore. It was about the enemy they were fighting. Humans weren't just survivors. They weren't just resourceful. They were something far worse. They were relentless. They were learning. And they were winning. The counter-offensive to retake Ghanim was supposed to be straightforward. A planetary assault backed by orbital bombardment, standard tactics, overwhelming force. The Zvani still had numbers, still had superior ships, still had technology that should have given them an edge. But none of it mattered. A fleet of human warships emerged from hyperspace, smaller and cruder than the Zvani dreadnoughts, yet more lethal than anything the aliens had ever encountered. Their ships weren't built for show. They didn't have sleek, elegant designs or over-engineered systems. They were weapons, pure and simple. And they struck without mercy. The first Zvani destroyer barely had time to react before railgun slugs ripped through its hull, each shot leaving gaping wounds in its armour. The once impenetrable shields fizzled uselessly against projectiles moving too fast to be stopped. On the ground, human forces advanced like a storm. Ghanim's capital, once a Zvani stronghold, was turned into a war zone. Zvani commanders screamed orders over comms, trying to organise their troops. But it was hopeless. Human soldiers moved in squads, coordinated, efficient, hitting weak points with precision. And the worst part? The Zvani weren't just losing soldiers, they were losing control. The humans were inside their ranks, disrupting supply lines, sabotaging defences, spreading chaos. Small strike teams, sometimes just a handful of men, would infiltrate their bases, plant explosives, and vanish before reinforcements arrived. It wasn't war. It was a slaughter. Back on Earth, celebrations erupted. Cities lit up with the news. Ghanim was free. The Zvani were bleeding, their fleets retreating, their once mighty empire cracking apart. But those in command knew better. Victory wasn't guaranteed. Not yet. The Zvani weren't just retreating, they were regrouping. Somewhere, deep in the void, they were preparing something desperate, something final. The first sign came when a human recon team intercepted a transmission near the edges of the Sol system. A single phrase, repeated over and over in Zvani script, Project Annihilation, ready for deployment. Nobody knew what it meant, but whatever it was coming, and humanity had to be ready. The Zvani had been broken, but they weren't done. Across the void, their last surviving war fleets gathered, forming the largest armada they had ever assembled. A final strike force, one built for a single purpose: destruction. Humanity had humiliated them, shattered their illusions of superiority, reduced their proud armies to little more than prey. They would not let this stand. If they couldn't rule Earth, they would burn it. That was what Project Annihilation was. Not a battle, not a war, a reckoning. The first Zvani ships arrived in high orbit around Earth in the dead of night. Thousands of them. More than humanity had ever faced in one place. Their war engines blotted out the stars, their weapons primed to turn the planet into little more than a husk. Humanity had spent the war fighting on the fringes of its empire, reclaiming lost ground, pushing back step by step. But now there was nowhere left to go. This was it, the final stand. From the moment the invasion began, it became clear. This wasn't like the other battles. The Zvani weren't here to conquer. They weren't interested in occupation. There were no demands, no ultimatums, just death. Their ships opened fire, raining destruction down onto the surface. Entire cities burned. human warships launched into the sky, engaging in desperate dogfights against the alien fleet. The planet's defences, massive railgun batteries beneath the surface, roared to life, sending metal slugs the size of buses into the enemy formations. It wasn't enough. For every Zvani ship that fell, 10 more remained. Humanity was outnumbered, outgunned, and on the brink of annihilation. And yet, they kept fighting. In the streets of what had once been New London, a squad of Marines dug in beneath the smouldering ruins of a skyscraper. Plasma fire rained down around them, the sky alight with the glow of burning ships lit the sky. Sergeant Davis reloaded his rifle, blood streaming down the side of his face. "We hold," he said. They were surrounded. They all knew it. The Zvani were coming in waves, overwhelming them with sheer numbers. But no one backed down. No one ran. They fired until their rifles were dry, then switched to pistols. When those were empty, they used knives. They refused to give an inch. High above the planet, in the wreckage of a fallen Zvani command ship, Captain Erickson led the last desperate strike. His team had boarded the ship moments before it crashed, fighting their way through the burning corridors toward the enemy flagship's core. Their mission wasn't to survive. It was to win. Erickson planted the final explosive against the reactor chamber, his hands shaking as he activated the detonator. Zvani guards rushed in, screaming in their guttural language, weapons raised. A gunshot rang out. The first alien dropped, then the second, the third. The humans held the line until the timer hit 0. In the skies above Earth, the flagship detonated. The explosion ripped through the Zvani armada like wildfire. Shockwaves tore through their formations, sending warships spiralling out of control, colliding, burning, breaking apart. One by one, their ships fell. The unstoppable fleet, the final hope of their dying empire, was gone. And Earth remained. It took days to confirm it, but when the last Zvani distress signal faded into silence, the truth became clear. It was over. The Zvani Empire, once feared across the stars, was no more. Their fleets lay in ruin. Their soldiers, those who hadn't died, fled into the void. They had come to claim Earth, to make humanity bow. Instead, they had been wiped from existence. The war that had begun with arrogance had ended with ashes. Humanity had stood against an empire that had never known defeat, and shattered it. Not with superior technology, not with sheer numbers, with resilience, with adaptation, with a simple bullet that was never supposed to work. And now, as the fires cooled and the stars shone once more, one undeniable truth remained. The galaxy belonged to the strong, and humans were stronger than anyone had ever imagined.